So when we left off, really it was Adam and Eve, messed up, and then we talked about what God cursed, right? And it's very important to understand that God did not curse Adam and Eve. God cursed the ground, God cursed the serpent, but he didn't curse Adam and Eve because God doesn't curse what he's blessed. God has blessed creation. When God made man, he blessed them. And so because of that, that blessing, remember, God doesn't change. Right? God doesn't change. And so once blessing has gone out from God, that blessing remains. God does not change. And I'm going to show you that now because that's really important to understand. So we're going to try and fly through this because we've got a few chapters to get through, but I'm just going to select the important stuff that I feel, needs to be highlighted. And so try and keep up, but I encourage you, take the verses down, write them down and go through it yourself. Meditate on it yourself. This whole Bible study, it's a deeper study. It's not just a fluff study, which means that because it's a deeper study, you need to go and spend some time reading over this stuff yourself. But at the same time, anything that we tell you has to be Bible-based. It can't be our opinion. When it's our opinion, all we can do then is give you what everybody else has, which is, well, they think this, we think that. We have to be Bible-based because that's unchanging. And then that's what gives you that bedrock to know why you believe what you believe. So I'm going to point some things out as we go through this. So, and you guys know the stories, but I'm gonna try and pick out some interesting parts of this. So it says Adam knew his wife, and Andrew always likes to say, when he says he knew, we all know what that means because everybody knows everybody, but you get to know your wife a little bit more intimately. The NIV says Adam made love to his wife, which is a beautiful way of saying it, and then the Old English is knew. And she conceived and bore Cain and said, "I have acquired a man from the Lord." Then she bore again, this time his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. This is important because we all know the story of what happens, but it's important to see their various roles. One keeps sheep and one was a tiller of the ground. The reason why I think this is important is because what did God curse? God didn't curse his creation as far as the animals in the garden. He cursed the serpent, but not the animals. But he did curse the ground. Okay, so interesting that Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. Okay, so interestingly, this is the first kind of sacrifice that we see, or first offering that we see. And God appreciated one offering, but not the other. And so it leads you to think, well, why? Is God an unjust God? Is God an unjust God because of his response? Did he just arbitrarily choose to, go for one, one offering and not the other? And I think there's two things that are not necessarily written here, but I think we can draw the conclusion. Number one is, my guess is that Cain was upset because the ground was cursed and he had to work hard in order to harvest his grain. So he was probably upset because his job was difficult. Not to say that Abel's wasn't difficult, but I think Cain's was difficult because we know that in the garden, the ground was cursed and so produced thorns and thistles. And so Cain was, it doesn't say that here, but I believe that that's part of the reason why he was upset. So I don't know how he did his offering. It's possible that the way that Cain offered up his sacrifice or his, offering to God, there was maybe some attitude with it. Maybe he had a bit of a chip on his shoulder. Because the Lord says to Cain, "Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it." Which is interesting. So God says to him, "Why are you angry? Why has your countenance fallen?" Because God's not blind, he can see. "If you do well, will you not be accepted?" Which automatically implies that Cain did not do well. Now, what was it that he didn't do well? It doesn't say specifically. That's why, I believe that it's to do with his attitude, right? But he didn't do something well because God's telling him, if you did it well, you would be accepted. But if you don't do it well, sin lies at the door and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. So God's making a point that Cain did something wrong. And he even says to Cain, be careful, because if you don't do well, sin lies at your door and its desire is for you. In other words, it's coming to get you. Be aware, but you need to master it. It says, "Now Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" Now, do you remember in the garden when Adam and Eve sinned, right? What's the first thing that Adam and Eve heard from God at that time? The first thing you heard was, "Where are you?" Right? Here is another example. When people think that, see, some people have the impression that in the garden, Adam and Eve messed up, and then God basically turned his back to humanity and just said, "Get out of the garden, you're all on your own." And we know that that's not true, because God continued to speak with Adam and Eve and continued to speak, look, even with Cain and Abel, right? So he wasn't a distant God. And God here gives him the same chance, the exact same chance that he gave Adam and Eve in the garden. When Adam and Eve were in the garden and they sinned, then God said, "Where are you?" He's drawing them in. He's wanting to be in relationship with them. He's giving them an opportunity to fess up. And this is what God's doing with Cain. He didn't come in and say to Cain, "Why did you do this?" Because it's clear in the next verse that he knew exactly what happened, right? God sees everything. But he's giving him an opportunity. He's calling him onto the carpet, so to speak, like we do with our children. What did you do? What did you do? We know what you did. That's the reason you're here, right? But we give him an opportunity. He said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" This is the equivalent of Adam's answer of, "It's this wife, it's this woman you gave me," right? It's like, come on, man, it's not my fault. He's saying, "It's none of my business. I don't know where he is." And he said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." So God knew all along. God wasn't surprised. He was giving him an opportunity. And again, this just shows God's love towards man. It's why I keep saying that Genesis is a love story. Genesis is a love story because it just shows God reaching out to man, even though man is sinful, even though man is doing the wrong thing, even though man is lying to God's face and pretending like he doesn't know what's going on, and God is still being kind. Now have a look. What happens? What's the consequence of his action? He said, "So now you are cursed. Now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond you shall be on the earth." Notice that the same punishment that he gave to Adam and Eve as far as the ground is the same one that he gave to Cain. He curses the ground and says the ground is not going to produce what it needs to produce for you. It will no longer yield its strength to you. And Cain says to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear," and so on. Again, I'm going to skip just because of time. It says, "And then the Lord says to him, therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark on Cain, lest anyone finding him should kill him." So even though God punishes Cain as far as, the earth not producing its fruit for him, the Lord still shows him mercy by putting this mark on him that says that if anybody finds him, they're going to be avenged sevenfold if they kill Cain. So again, God is just showing love, to Cain, even though Cain, number one, killed his brother, number two, lied about it, not knowing. And then, instead of Cain saying, "Look how bad I am," he's worried still about his own skin. "My punishment is greater than I can bear. I'm going to be killed." And so God says, "No, even though you've done all this stuff, I am still going to show you kindness." You go, man, like God is so good. God is so good. How do we expect God to treat us when we do even a relatively minor thing? And we see how God treats, this is the first murder. This is the first murder in the Bible. And so you can see the goodness of God all throughout. Then it says, "Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord, dwelt in the land of Nod in the east of Eden." So again, God is still with man. God is still with man. I won't go through this, but it talks about various other people and Lamech and so on. Let's go to Genesis 5. Can you guys see that? Does it show you Genesis 5? Give me a thumbs up. Yep, perfect. Thank you. All right. Now, this is the book of the genealogy of Adam. In the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female and blessed them and called them mankind in the day they were created. Again, you notice that whole thing about male and female, it comes back again. Right? We talked about this, that Adam, when he was created, he was male and female. And female was taken out of him and put into Eve. This says that same thing again, because it's in the day that God created man. Remember, God created Adam first. Eve didn't come till later on, after he created all the animals and everyone else, and Adam named the animals, and there was nobody that was like him. So this just goes back and confirms the same thing. He created the male and female and blessed them and called them mankind in the day they were created. Okay. Then it says, Adam lived and so on. He had kids, and this is just the genealogy. And look, when I started reading the Bible, I always had kind of a misunderstanding of why it tells you all these begets. This person begot this person, who begot this person. I'm like, man, it's such a I don't know, pointless exercise. Like, why is that there? But here is the interesting thing. If you go through all the begets, it does a couple of things. The first thing it does is it establishes credibility. Right? Because it's one thing to say, well, here was God, or here was Jesus, or here was Adam, or here was Noah. And it's like, well, who's this fictional person you're telling me about? But if you can say, Chris's father was, John, and then John's father was Paul, and Paul's father was Philip, and Philip's, father was Steve, and so on, people can go back and look because people knew who these people were. And especially in the Old Testament, right at the start, if you look, people lived a long time. They didn't live, 50, 60, 100 years. They lived 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 900 years. So people knew the generations many, many, many lines down. I mean, if someone's had, we call a generation 20 years, right? You can argue it multiple ways, but a generation typically is 20 years, 25 years, however you want to look at it. And so if you've lived to 900 and a generation is 20 years, that's 5 generations for every 100 years you've lived. Right? So you've got 450 generations, right? Just in Noah's lifetime. So think about that. Those people all knew other people that could trace themselves back to Adam. And so that's why the begets are so important, establishes credibility. It also helps us to understand a timeline, because typically we'll say this person was the father and he lived this long. So then you can figure out, well, this person was born at this stage, they had a kid at this age, and then the kid lived this long, and then it'll have other information like when the person died and so on. So for example, here in verse 28 it says, now Lamech lived 182 years and had a son, and he called his name Noah, saying, this one will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord has cursed. Notice that people throughout the lineage knew, right? They knew that the ground was cursed, and they knew the ground was cursed because of the Lord, you see? So that wasn't lost. They were aware of it. And what they were saying is, Noah will comfort us because of the ground which the Lord has cursed. It says, and after he begot Noah, Lamech lived 595 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. So notice all these different kind of begets, and the information helps us to establish the history of who these people were, the times that they lived, and also gives the Bible credibility. Very few books go to the trouble of doing this, right? And if you look in other, I'll call them religious texts, you're not going to find this. And that's because some of those things were either not true, or if they were true, they couldn't be established with the same level of authenticity as the Bible. It really just helps to establish the Bible as being an authentic book, which I find really incredible. So I encourage you, don't necessarily read all the begats, but go through when you're doing a study and understand, who are these people? How old did they live? Where did they live? It'll explain, because sometimes you read the Bible, it's like, and this happened in this area, which is east of this river, which is next to this thing, which is by these mountains. Why does it say that? It's because that's a real place. And when people read the text, they knew, it's referring to that place. It'll be like if you're in Melbourne City or Sydney, it might say, it's next to the Opera House, across from the bay, where you can see it from, I don't know, Barangaroo or something, right? Like it does that so that you can go pinpoint the space, as opposed to saying it happened in a place somewhere at a point in time, which becomes too general and anybody can fluff that. But if you say it happened here in this year and those people were alive and it was the son of this person, other people can corroborate that and say, yeah, we knew those people. And yes, that person was such and such a son. And yes, that did happen. It'll say something happened. Like you hear this whole story and it'll say that happened in the time of this, when this person was the king. And it says that because they want you to know that that king was at that time. And you can go back and look at it and say, did that happen during that time? And in that time frame, was that really the king of that area or of that situation? So again, it corroborates the Bible, which I think is really important. So hopefully you caught that. Let's move on to Genesis 6. Now it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and the daughters were born to men, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful. They took wives for themselves of all those of themselves of all whom they chose. So it's interesting. It says, now when it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men. Now, I'm not going to get into all of that. People, talk about the Nephilim and stuff like that. I'm not going to get into that. It's just not the time. Fun to discuss, but not for this purpose. So those of you that want to talk about that, let's park that for another time. It says, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh. Now, if you click this little A, it tells you the footnote. And the word strive really means abide. In other words, my spirit can't stay with man forever, for he is indeed flesh. Because I'm spirit, I'm eternal. The flesh is not eternal. So I have to put a limit on how long people can live. And so God says, yet his days shall be 120 years. So this is where it tells us in the Bible how long God expects man to live. And I mentioned this in previous teachings, but a lot of people will claim 70 or 80 years, and you can look that up. And they think that 70 or by reason of strength 80 years that's a blessing. That is not a blessing. 70 or 80 years is actually a curse, and that curse was there for the Israelites that came out of Egypt because those people were not allowed to enter the promised land because of their unbelief, and so God needed them to die. And so basically, most of them were going to live to 70 years. And if some of them were really strong by reason of strength, they were really using the strength to stay alive. But ultimately, God was saying, hey, this is a limited time span or a limited lifespan, because I need them to die out before they can enter the promised land. Sorry, one sec. One moment. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. My thing came up saying that my internet connection is unstable. So I wanted to make sure that we don't have other internet things in the house running at the same time. Can you guys still hear me okay? Awesome. Thank you. Right. So if you're claiming over yourself or over your loved ones or whatever, and someone gets to 80 and you're like, well, by reason of strength, God's blessed you with 80 years, you're cutting their life short by 40 years. Right? Now, I'm not saying we're all going to live to 120, but I'm saying that's what God's promised us. And if God's promised us that, then we can keep that promise. Okay, because remember, God doesn't change. What God has said is what will remain. So, talks about people that had giants on the earth and so on, and that's the Nephilim. So I don't want to talk about that. But I want to keep going. It says, then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Let me read that again. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent, not some intent, but every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So it's not just that it's every intent, but it's every intent continually. In other words, all people were doing was evil. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. That shows me a few things. Number one, it shows me that God has a degree, however you want to kind of term this, but has a degree of expectation for us as his creatures, as his creation. He has an expectation for us. And when we don't meet that expectation, you can see he was grieved in his heart. He was sorry. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So it's interesting. He feels hurt, he feels sad, and yet he doesn't destroy all of mankind. He spares one. It says, Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Then it talks about the genealogy of Noah. And this is what's interesting. It says, Noah was just a man, perfect in his generations. Now, that word perfect just means blameless or having integrity. It doesn't mean that he was sinless, right? Blameless is different to sinless, okay? Blameless means I can't hold you accountable for what you've done wrong. It doesn't mean that you've done nothing wrong, Okay, it's a completely different thing. And having integrity. So in other words, he was an upright and a just man. It says Noah walked with God, and Noah begot 3 sons, and so on. And just talks about all of that stuff. And then he tells him to make the ark, which we all know, and tells him that the flood waters are coming. And then this is the first time that God establishes a covenant. He says, but I will establish my covenant with you, with Noah, and you shall go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Now, why is this important? This is important because God is starting to bind himself. And this is really a key thing that many people don't understand. When God makes a covenant, it means that he's making a contract, if you will, with either humanity or in a situation with specific people or with the Jews or whoever it might be. And so here is God saying, I am establishing my covenant with you. In other words, I'm going to keep you safe. Here is where God's telling him to build the ark and so on. And here is where really ultimately God is promising Noah that he's going to keep him safe, and not just him, but his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives. And then he starts to give him instructions about the animals and so on. And then Noah did everything according to all that God commanded him. Now, the interesting thing is Noah's building this ark, right, without seeing a drop of water, without seeing anything like the calamity that God has told him is going to come. God has made a covenant with Noah long before anything bad happened. In other words, Noah had to trust God's words, because at that point there was no flood. At that point, Noah hadn't seen any of the things that God was telling him. So God used Noah, and Noah operated by faith. Right? Have a look. It says, then the Lord said to Noah, come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Come into where? Come into the ark. Well, which ark? The ark that Noah had been building, right, for hundreds and hundreds of years. So God is almost inviting him, right, inviting him into his own ark, right? Because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Then he talks about all the animals and so on. And look at the end. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters were on the earth. So do you realize Noah had to believe God and trust in God in order for him to build this ark, to then board the ark and be kept safe through this whole period with people mocking. We've all seen probably, the 10 Commandments or, different stories, obviously the cartoons about Noah and people coming and making fun of Noah and, when's the rain going to start and so on. And you have to see that Noah in his day, it would have been very, very challenging and difficult for him to go through this process and for many, many years building this ark and not seeing the fruition of it. Because Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters were on the earth. So it's huge. So when you're sitting there thinking God spoke something to me, right? Because God told him, build an ark, a flood's coming. And here's the guy toiling away for hundreds of years without a raindrop, so to speak. And then he's got to just continue this in the face of everyone telling him that he's crazy. So when God's promised you something or when God's spoken to you something, you have to understand 2 things. Number one is, if God speaks it, it's going to come to pass. Because God is not a man that he should lie. Once he speaks it, once it goes out of his mouth, God will fulfill the promise that he has made or the word that he has made. That's the first thing. But the second thing to understand is that there is a timing to what God is doing. And if Noah would have expected the rain to start the minute that God spoke, he would have been sorely disappointed and he would have given up long before he ever saw the ark built. But Noah understood that there was a timing and he was waiting on God. He knew that when God had given him the go-ahead to start the ark, that it would take time for all of that to happen before the rain would come. And oftentimes we saw this in Colorado, where students would hear, they'd watch like an ad, or maybe they heard Andrew speak somewhere, or they heard to someone else, say, hey, come to Bible college. It's, you got to come to Bible college. And Andrew had this kind of saying that if God's telling you to come to Bible college, it's not the voice of the devil, it's God, because the devil's not going to tell you to come to Bible college. And it's true. The devil's not going to send you to Bible college. But the thing that we have to add on top of that is that there's a timing. God may speak something to you, but there may be a time frame before that thing is going to come to pass. You need to be patient. And we had so many people turn up to Caris, and I'm not kidding, I'm not exaggerating. America's a big road trip kind of country, and they have those U-Hauls, you can add like that trailer to the back of your car, and people would turn up in the Caris parking lot, or car park. Whenever I used to say car park to people in America, they just laugh at you because they call them a parking lot, so I've now had to adopt their phraseology. Because when I used to say car park, they're like, oh, what, the cars are playing in the park, they're having a good time, a car park, they used to make fun of me. So people would pull their cars into the car park with this U-Haul, and they'll literally, and I'm not exaggerating, they would run out of fuel as they were pulling into the car park. And they'd be like, this is my place called there, and they'd use all the verses and God's going to provide and whatever. And maybe God did speak to them to come, but God didn't speak to them to come so they'd be destitute and sleeping under a bridge and couch surfing and, didn't have enough money for food or even just to get anywhere. We would have people, because I used to see the emails, we would have people fly in from overseas to come to Caris. They'd turn up to Denver Airport, and you'd get like an email saying such and such is at the airport. He's here from wherever, Ireland, Mozambique, Australia, whatever it might be. And he needs a ride from Denver into Woodland Park. I'm thinking, man, you've come halfway around the world. You're going to establish yourself at college at least for 12 months. And you didn't organize yourself a taxi from the airport? Like, what ridiculous thing is this? Like, how did you make it, even here? And all I'm saying is that people always want to listen to the first bit, which is that call and that excitement, but there is wisdom that you need to use. And we'll talk about that in time. But I mentioned that because, we tend to over spiritualize things sometimes. And there is some practical aspects of it. And one of those practical aspects is timing, right? Noah didn't go and collect all the animals until he'd already built the ark, right? The animals didn't come to just sit around with Noah for hundreds of years, right? The animals came when Noah had finished. So that's important. You have to have faith, but at the same time, you have to have patience and timing. Let's move on. In that previous chapter, it talks about what happened, the flood came and so on. I don't want to focus on that because we're talking about what was lost in the garden. It says, then God remembered Noah. This is after everything had happened. It says, then God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the animals that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped. And the rain from the heavens was restrained. And the waters receded continually from the earth. At the end of the 150 days, the waters decreased. So a couple of things to note here, just for interest's sake. Whenever you've seen the cartoons, what you see is just massive amounts of rain. But have a look. What happened in Noah's day was not just rain. It says the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped. The floods actually came from underneath. Yes, there was rain, but water actually flooded the earth from underneath, because we know that there's water in the earth, right? We know if you dig, that's how you dig a well and you pull water out. So this shows that the flood wasn't caused by just...
Sorry, Ruby, we just lost you.
Okay. Am I still lost, or can you guys hear me now? Am I back? Okay. Sorry, guys. Can you hear me now? Okay. Yep. Okay. Can someone tell me what's the last thing they heard so I can try and rewind myself? Because I don't know where I cut out.
Well, all I heard was when the fountains of the deep.
Fountains of the deep.
Okay, perfect. All right. So let me go back to the screen. Yeah. So the point that I was making is that oftentimes people ridicule, the story of Noah and say, well, you couldn't have had that much rain to flood the earth. The rain was not what flooded the earth. The rain was part of it. But you can see that the fountains of the deep, all the water that was in the earth, underneath all the soil, right? That's what flooded the earth. And so you can see that God made a wind to pass over the earth and the water subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. In other words, when people try and kind of lob you these little things to try and get you off track, this is why. You need to know why you believe what you believe. You have to believe that the flood was a real thing. Otherwise, people are going to find a way to ridicule you, and you're going to think like, you know what, maybe this person knows. Maybe this person is a climate expert, and they know that, if it's raining, that rain can't cover the earth. And then it makes people feel uncomfortable and think, well, maybe it's not true. Maybe, it's a bit of an exaggeration. Maybe Noah didn't really go through a flood. This is why you need to understand the difference between what's an actual flood, that's a God flood, right, versus what we call a flood, which is really just kind of heavy rain. So just an important tidbit to remember. And then it just talks about, it all finished and Noah was able to get out of the boat and so on. God's covenant. It's this important. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a soothing aroma. Then the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. Although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. So here's a couple of things that are happening. Number one is you can see that sin consciousness, right? That sin consciousness is in Noah's heart, because he realizes that the reason why everybody had to die is because they were sinful. And so he takes animals and he sacrifices them. He offers them up to the Lord to atone for sins. And the Lord is pleased with it. He smelled a soothing aroma. And then the Lord said in his heart, I'll never again curse the ground for man's sake. And this is the next bit is so interesting. He says, although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. So oftentimes you hear people, and honestly, you'll hear this a lot in Christian circles. You'll hear like, God, look at all these sinners, why don't you smite them? Why don't you, kill them? Why don't you bring them down? God is aware that people are sinful. He was aware because, Jesus was slain from the foundations of the world. God is aware of people's sin, but God has made a covenant with mankind, and he will never again destroy every living thing. The second judgment is really a heaven and hell issue. It's not a sin issue. You can see that in Noah's time, the reason why God took everybody out was because he was trying to cleanse, the human race of not necessarily of sin, but of all that sinful behavior, because every thought was evil. But he realized, or he makes this statement, right? Because remember before, God was grieved. We read it previously, where it says that in his heart he was grieved. This shows that God's always come to I don't know if you want to call it a realization, because God's all knowing, but it's basically he's at a place now where he's saying, I'm aware that man's heart is evil from his youth, but I'm still going to make this covenant with them and I will never destroy them again. And so it's wrong to say, God, why don't you get rid of these people? Why don't you just, strike them dead? Because God's made a covenant with humanity. And this is why I thought this was really interesting, because God has said here, he will never do it again. And so for those that are, thinking, well, God, why don't you take them out? He can't take them out because God's made a covenant. So that's important. So what did we lose in the garden? We lost a lot, but we did gain a covenant from God saying that he'll never destroy us again. This is the last chapter I'm gonna go through, and then I'm gonna open up for Q&A. So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Where have we heard that before? We heard that in the garden. God told Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Notice the same blessing. See, this is God just coming back over and over and over again, right? So God just told us in the previous chapter that he's well aware that humanity is evil in its heart from its youth. And yet God blesses Noah and his sons and says to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. God is a good God. And then it says, and the fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth and on every bird of the air and on all that move on the earth and on all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand. In other words, you are to have dominion. Remember, that's what he said to Adam. He gave him dominion over all the beasts and over all the fish of the sea. He gave him dominion. He gave them control or gave them power. And this is God saying the same thing that he said to Adam. He's saying the same thing to Noah. Why is he saying these things to Noah? Because what God has blessed, he can't change. God blessed Adam and gave him these attributes. God said to him, be fruitful and multiply. God said to him, have dominion. And God is just repeating the same thing to Noah. He's making it real to Noah. He's reminding Noah that you have these attributes. But this is not a new thing. This is not what God is giving Noah because Noah's done anything special. All God is doing, because think about it, Noah is sin conscious right now. He's aware. He's looked around. And everybody on earth is dead. He's come out of this ark. Right? You got to think about this. Comes out of this ark and he's starting creation or humanity again. It's all coming from Noah now. Noah's the new Adam, right? If you want to look at it that way. Noah's the new black. Noah's the new Adam, right? And so now Noah's got to start the population of earth again. But he's very awkward about it because he's seen what happened to all these other people. And he's got to be thinking, man, what happens if the people after me, what happens if they mess up? Is God going to, get rid of us again? And so God makes a covenant with Noah and says, never again. That's the first thing. The second thing is God reminds him of the same blessings and the same process that he wanted Adam to go through. He made it real to Noah because Noah needed to hear it from God. Because I'm sure that Noah was sitting there and saying, wow, do you think God really wants us to be fruitful and multiply? I mean, maybe he said that to Adam when Adam was in the garden and everything was good. But now, does God really want us to be fruitful and multiply? Or does God just kind of want me to have my kids and just kind of be done with it? So God has to tell him, be fruitful and multiply. And then I'm sure that Adam is sitting there going, well, you rescued all these animals. Looks like my connection's a little bit funny again. Can everyone still hear me okay? Okay, thanks. Sorry, I've got a little thing on my screen. So I don't know why the internet's so bad today. Must be something wrong. But Noah, remember, he's got 2 of every animal on this ark. He saves them, right? So now Noah's sitting there thinking, God bothered to save all these animals. Can we still eat them? Maybe he's not having pork, but actually probably was having pork at that stage because the law hadn't come in yet. But if Adam's sitting there hungry, he's thinking, do I kill animals? Do I not? Can I fish? Because all these things have been saved on the ark. So Adam doesn't know what the rules are anymore. So God's saying to him, no, you still as humanity, you still have dominion. And to make sure that that's correct, he says, they are given into your hand. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. Why is God telling him that? They've been eating animals for a long time. Think about it. The reason why God's telling him is because he didn't know. He wasn't sure. He had to be told again, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. I have given you all things, even as the green herbs. Then he tells him, don't eat blood and so on. Here is interesting. Verse 5, it says, surely for your, as in human, for your lifeblood, I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast, I will require it. And from the hand of men. Here's what he's telling Noah. If an animal kills a human, I am going to demand a reckoning from that animal. He's establishing a pecking order the same way he established it with Adam. He's showing that humans are above animals. He's showing that humans are worth more to God than the animals. Now, if you're an animal lover, don't get upset. It's just the Bible. It doesn't mean you can't love your pets, right? Sometimes pets are better than humans, right? Some animals, man, you'd rather have a dog than some people, in your life. But I'm just saying, this establishes a pecking order and what God values. God tells Noah, you can eat the animals. But God also tells Noah, the animals can't eat you, right? Surely for your lifeblood, I'll demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast, I'll require it, and from the hand of men. From the hand of every man's brother, I'll require the life of man. In other words, don't kill each other as humans. You can eat the animals, but the animals can't eat you. And by the way, the dread of them, the dread of you, in other words, the fear of man will be on every beast of the earth. And that's how it is. If you look, animals are afraid of humans. That's the way it's supposed to be. Again, don't get upset, but read your Bible, because it's funny, people get all hung up on this stuff because they think it's, this implies that you should be cruel to animals. No, it's not saying that at all. But it is saying that there is a pecking order, and we need to understand the reason for that. And this is all laid out in Genesis. So you've been given authority and you've been given dominion over the earth and everything that's in the earth. Then it gives the same kind of blessing. says, then God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, and as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, of all that go out of the ark, every beast of the earth. Thus I establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. God didn't just establish, interesting, God didn't just establish a covenant with Noah and his family. He established the covenant with the animals as well, which means that the animals must understand intuitively in some way that God has told them, right, that they will never be killed again either. So God is so broad in his approach. He's not just saying, hey, you know what, humans, but he's actually saying, I care about animals too. So, even though God's given dominion to us over animals, this is showing that God still values animals, because he doesn't just make a covenant with humans, he makes a covenant with the animals as well. Why would he do that? No one's forcing him to do it. And then he says, this is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you. In other words, I am making a point to let not just you know, but to let the animals know. Why would he do that? Why would God do that? It's interesting, because you can't tell Noah, hey, tell the animals that they're going to be fine too, right? If the animals are terrified that they're going to be flooded again, Noah, you go and tell them that they'll be fine. No, God's actually saying it to everyone, to the animals and to Noah and his family, which means that
we've lost you again, Rudy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Nice, good.
How much did you, did it just skip or did it?
Oh no, you're back. You said about God telling the animals.
Yeah.
God, yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Verse
sorry. I don't know
12.
what's going on tonight, guys. I apologize. Normally it's...
That's all right. You're good
normally it's
now.
really good. So yeah, everything's off in the house, so there shouldn't be anything. Hopefully it'll fix itself, and next week we won't have it. So I apologize for that. But yeah, so the point is, all these animals have also heard from God now, and we know the creation responds to God. In fact, Jesus says that, when people were complaining that he was being praised and that people were making noise, he said, if they would shut up, the rocks would cry out. In other words, creation knows who its creator is. It's humanity that's lost its way. And then it says, I sent my rainbow in a cloud. It shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be when I bring a cloud over the earth, and so on. Basically, I'm going to show you a sign, and that's the rainbow. And that is a covenant which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. The waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. So that's kind of the goodness of God, that he takes the time to not just explain to humanity what they need to know, but also to the animals as well. It just shows that God cares about his creation. Now, as far as let's finish off with this. I'll finish off with this because this is an important point, and we can kind of springboard for this on next week. It says, and Noah began to be a farmer, and he planted a vineyard. Then he drank of the wine and was drunk, and became uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. So Noah awoke from his wine. In other words, he sobered up, and he knew what his youngest son had done to him. Then he said, "Cursed be Canaan." Interesting. Have a look. Who actually messed up? It says, up the top, it says in verse 21, it says, then he drank of the wine and was drunk and became uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father. Ham was the one that did the wrong thing, right? Because Ham went and told the brothers. Ham was able to cover Noah because he saw him, but he didn't. He didn't cover him. He went and told his brothers. Then his brothers went and put on their backs, right? They put the garment and walked backwards so that they would not see Noah's nakedness. And now, who does Noah curse? Does he curse Ham? No. He curses Ham's son. Which is interesting. It's interesting. Why would it be? Why would it be Canaan? Why wouldn't it be in Ham? It says, a servant of servants, he shall be to his brethren. And then he says, blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and so on, and may Canaan be his servant, and so on. He says multiple times, right? And so we see here a couple of things. Number one, Noah had understood the power of curses, right? Because remember, Adam didn't have any of this stuff in the garden. All Adam knew was that he was able to eat the fruit. The fruit was great. Everything was fantastic. The temperature was perfect. And him and his wife were just butt naked running around the garden. Everything was fantastic, right? At no point in time did Adam worry about curses. Then Adam hears the curse conversation, right? About the serpent getting cursed and the ground getting cursed and so on. Then we know that they're starting to understand curses, because even after the flood, Noah goes and, well, firstly, we saw the curses earlier on when, we talk about Cain and Abel and obviously the ground being cursed and so on. And then when Noah was born, remember, when Noah was born, what did they call him? They said Noah, because he's going to help ease our pain from the curse of the ground. So Noah was very curse conscious, and he knew the power of curses because he was named regarding a curse. Right? So it says, so when he awakes from his wine, he curses Canaan. Imagine how powerful those words were, not just to Noah, but also to Canaan, because they knew what curses meant. And so I think that's interesting that God, right? God doesn't curse any people. God doesn't curse any people up until this point. He doesn't curse them. The first curse that I can see, unless I missed it, is Noah curses Canaan. So now humanity is cursing other humans. Now what's entering into humanity? So first, the first death was the spiritual death, was Adam and Eve. They died, right? They died spiritually. Then the first death, as far as death in creation, was when God killed the animals to make the skins to cover Adam and Eve. Then the first physical death between humans is Cain and Abel. So notice that God sets up a standard. Humanity doesn't meet that standard. So in the garden, humanity loses what? Humanity loses, firstly, its spirit dies. Then it loses peace and that freedom and that carefree nature, because now Adam's hiding from God in the garden. Then it loses the ability for creation not to suffer any sort of death, because now Adam and Eve are naked and they're going to be sent out of the garden. And because God's still a good God, he makes them, Nikes and Adidas outfits so that they can, not be cold on the earth, right? And then Cain and Abel take it one step further and they introduce murder. And then they take it one step further and do this and do this and do this. And they keep going to the point where now God gets rid of all of the people on the earth and starts again just with Noah. And even though Noah was perfect in his day or was blameless or whatever, notice that Noah was sin conscious because he realized the mess that everyone had made. So he goes and offers, makes an offering to the Lord. And then even though God blesses him and says, be fruitful and multiply, because now Noah is embarrassed because he got drunk and fell asleep naked and his kids saw him, he introduces curses now into people. Do you understand? Like it's such a turning point for humanity, that now humanity takes their own, I don't know what's the best word, but they take it upon themselves to do what is God's role. In other words, God was the one that was, able to bless and curse. And now humanity says, I've been made in the image of God, and I'm going to take what God has, and I'm going to use that in a negative way, which is huge. It's huge. So then it says, and Noah lived after the flood 350 years. So all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. So I think it's really, really, really important as we reflect on this. I'm going to open up for Q&A in a minute. But it's really important as we reflect on this, again, that thread that goes through Genesis, to understand what was lost in the garden. And have a look at how humanity degrades, so to speak, over time. We just keep going over and over and over, and we just on this slippery slope. We sin, and then we blame God for giving us the woman. The woman blames the serpent. The serpent's got no one to blame. Now the serpent's stuck. He's got to crawl on his belly. I assume he was always crawling on his belly, but maybe not. Maybe the serpent had feet and he lost his feet. I'm not sure, right? Then Cain and Abel, think about it. Cain and Abel were the first kids right? Like they're there. They know God. They speak to God. God is still communing or having communion with man. And yet they still murder. And on it goes to the point now where Noah, who's been blessed by God because of his own stupidity and because of his own selfishness, and now his embarrassment, now he curses Canaan. To me, that's amazing. It's amazing. And you start to see these firsts. You start to see these firsts, the first death, the first murder, the first, the first curse. And you go, wow, like this is why we are where we are. And this is why God has a redemption plan. And as we go through, the Bible, you'll see like how all these firsts are occurring, and then God has to deal with it. And so ultimately, it's not God that's causing these things, it's man. Humans are the ones that have messed up, and we need a savior. And so when you're sharing with people about the Bible or sharing with people about God, really what we're saying is like, man, this is why creation has become corrupted. And it wasn't because God was the one corrupting it. It's because when we've been left to our own devices, we just continue over and over and over to make these mistakes. No one told Noah to get drunk. He got drunk on his own. No one told him to be naked. He got naked on his own, right? Now, obviously his son shouldn't have gone in and seen his nakedness, and he should have proceeded differently, but he didn't. And so instead of Noah saying, geez, maybe I shouldn't have gone drunk, Noah's like, okay, well, now you're at fault and I'm going to curse you. To me, that's huge. So anyway, that's it. I'm going to open it up for questions.